Good morning.
Good morning.
When I do good, I feel good. When I do bad, I feel bad. That's my religion. I've always loved that very simple phrase that's been attributed to Abraham Lincoln. A lot has been attributed to Abraham Lincoln, but it does gel with his general approach to life. It's simple and it's down to earth, and it says that you can do things that are good for others while making your life better too. It avoids having to say that doing good you have to suffer, like a lot of Calvinist strains of Christianity says, that goodness is wrapped up in suffering. So I want to encourage folks to do good, but I don't want them to have to martyr themselves. I support doing good for everybody's mutual benefit. And that's reflected in ethical culture's version of the golden rule, which goes as follows. Seek to elicit the best in others, and thereby you will bring to light the best that is in yourself. When I do good, I feel good. When I do bad, I feel bad. That's my religion. Now, Lincoln's words reminds me a little story that has been told about him. It was about, some versions say he was a young boy, other versions say he was a young lawyer, but he was going along the road when he saw a pig that was stuck in the mud. And supposedly he stopped, he rolled up his sleeves, he got out and he lifted the pig out of the mud and put it back on dry ground. And his friends who were with him, looking at him splattered with mud, say, "Why on heavens would you do that?" And Lincoln said, "Had I not done that, I would not have been able to sleep tonight." Now, I thought of that story often in my life because I wanted to consider the question, why be good? I had a relatively active moral conscience, so that interested me. And it leads to a whole host of other questions, like, why do we do good? What is doing good? And is doing good out of self-interest something that ruins the goodness? In other words, did Lincoln do good because he wanted to sleep that night? I hope you find this exploration today useful in your own journey of figuring out answers to this question. I'll be curious in particular if you agree that doing good not only helps others, but helps yourself. Random acts of kindness, do they relieve your anxiety? Do they raise your malaise up into a better state of mind? Can it help you live a more meaningful life? All right, let's start with what is good. And I'm not going to do enough for you today on that because I'm going to keep it short. This is a complicated question. It's got a lot of answers to it. So I'm sort of drawn to what I want to call a bouquet answer. Rather than giving you a precise, conceptually clear, and narrow definition of what is good, I'm going to suggest a number of qualities that I associate with doing good that look nice when you put them together in a collection. So it's like a bouquet. So I'm going to say that I believe that doing good is about being generous, compassionate, caring, helpful, thoughtful, respectful, honest, kind, just. What other words, just single words, would you want to add to that bouquet? What would you want to say you do that is good? One word. What else would you add?
Loving.
Loving. Kind. Helpful. Empathetic. Humorous. Beauty. Loyal. Trustworthy. It's a big bouquet. Lots more, I'm sure. Could doing good include ethical culture's commitment to treat every person as being of inherent worth? Could it include building ethical relationships or making the world more just? I think it could. Could it be more concrete? Could it be volunteering at your local school or your civic association or your place of worship? Maybe. Does it include donating financially to good causes that help people in need? I would think so. How about simply smiling at people? I think that's doing some good. So maybe all of this illustrates that doing good is a lot of things, and that's where I want to leave the definition. Related to these qualities, though, I want to say is mainly intentions. Most of the words we shared today was about what we wanted to do, because we strive to be generous, compassionate, caring, helpful, thoughtful, respectful, honest, just, and kind. We aspire to it. It's about our intention. But I think it's important to say that doing good cannot be merely about intentions. What we intend to do must be weighed with the impact of our action. So, for example, let's say we had a situation where we don't listen to people. We don't listen to what they want about in the world. And we just rush to do them some good. Let's say somebody lost a pet and is grieving, and we decide to go over to their apartment unannounced with a cheese pizza and watch movies with them that night. Now, what would our lactose intolerant friend think of the cheese pizza? Or if they wanted to spend the night reading to ease their grief? How would they see our intention? I believe they might see us as a do-gooder. A do-gooder, which is used as a pejorative for folks more eager to, quote, help than to actually find out what would be most helpful. They see, perhaps, as caring more about checking the good deed for the day box. They might be seen as caring more about their prestige in society or their self-image. We must always assess the effects of our actions on others. So wanting to good, I think, to do good is not sufficient. It's actually doing good. And that means listening to people. All right, let me move on to why we do good, because this is the core of this talk, I think. Wide range of answers. It changes with different people and in different cultures. It's very, very different. Today I'm going to use a framework some of you know very well, Lawrence Kohlberg, who is a psychologist who really established one way to look at ethics. He based his theory on Piaget's cognitive development theory, and the conclusions are somewhat challenged, and there are lots of things we can talk about the limits of Kohlberg's analysis. That'll have to be another day, because there are issues with it, some drawbacks. But most people agree with the general conclusion Kohlberg came up with, and that was that over the early stages of our development, we go through certain stages of development where certain types of reasons tend to dominate. So, example, when we're a toddler, and this is my interpretation of Kohlberg, it's not strict, but I think it's relatively on. Kohlberg suggests that when we're a toddler, we do good things for two reasons. One is out of a natural, instinctive desire to connect. We want to be connected particularly to our parents. So kind gestures that arise out of love or other emotions of the heart are where that good act comes from. And in turn, it leads the people to recognize you, to see you, to say thank you, and you begin to get this feedback loop, which I'm going to talk about a couple of times today. So if I was to, as a toddler, give my parent one of my cookies, they might say, oh, that's so nice, and I'd get affirmation, maybe a hug, and that again would create this desire for me to do it again. Being kind to others leads people to be kind to you. A second reason why many toddlers do good things, according to Kohlberg, is that they basically are told to do it. Okay? We follow commands by authority figures, especially when we're young, or we're frightened, or small, or weak. We do this maybe for instrumental reasons, to get rewards and avoid punishments. And in fact, Aristotle said that that is the heart of moral education, that we have to use various methods of compliance through conditioning, that's what being good is. Kohlberg's framework then says, as we get a bit older, we begin to do good to fit in. To fit in. Being good, being generous, compassionate, helpful, and so on helps us get accepted into peer groups or social networks or civic worlds. It's a connection to something greater than ourselves in a way. And that's a very deep human need. As we develop intellectually, we may do good in order to meet obligations that come from being members of a community. We may do good in order to honor a social contract, so to speak. Being part of society, after all, is not free. I pay my taxes so that there are schools and roads, and so the whole social fabric holds together. But at the pinnacle of Kohlberg's hierarchy, according to his work, is when we become fully rational. At that point, we can choose to do good and to act ethically because of the dictates of reason. We're impelled towards consistency and order. And rather than being bound to a state or a social structure or an authority figure, we act out of a duty to reason. It's drawn from the philosophy of Immanuel Kant, and this framework implies that human beings, as rational creatures, are drawn to do good. Now, Kohlberg implies a hierarchy, that we go from the lower levels to the top. I have the biggest problem with that. Another talk will be on that. Because personally, I think I do good for all of those reasons. Now, I'm not necessarily proud of some of the reasons, but I think I do them all. I think I do good out of natural urges, for rewards. I think I do good to fit in at times, to fulfill social obligations and civic duties, and because rationality impels me to. All of those. They're very different reasons, and they're different degrees, and they happen at different times, and certainly different people have them. Some of you might think some of those are the main reasons why you do good and others don't work for you. There is a problem with that because it seems so subjective, like doing good can be anything. So I wanted to say, well, what does science tell us? Is there an objective way to understand why we do good? And there are a couple. Some believe that evolution explains everything and explains doing good. Professor Stephen Post, by the way, I kind of believe that, right? Stephen Post is a professor at Case Western University, and he said that doing good helps build group unity and social cohesion. And this can enhance the health and survivability of groups. He says that Darwin believed that group selection played a strong role in human evolution, and it helped benefit the group. It associates people together and creates feelings of protection and happiness and pleasure, and helps you to survive. It's a survival tool for a group to help each other out. Now, alternatively, in groups where people don't help each other out, they might not fare as well in the competition with other groups for resources, because there's this inner division. One researcher said, our predecessors developed a complex system of social conventions and institutions that reinforce the importance of group-mindedness. In general, the emotional reward we feel when we help someone stems from an evolutionary adaptation that predisposes us to form tighter bonds with those in our circle. All right. I think that's probably true. Biochemistry offers other reasons, another scientific area. Brain science, what does that tell us? There's a study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science that indicated that when people donate to charity, for example, the brain's mesolimbic system is activated. Now, this is the same part of the brain that's activated by money or sex or other pleasurable rewards. And chemicals like oxytocin are injected into our bloodstream. And human beings are known to go very far to try to get that chemical hit. Anecdotally, this is talked about in a PBS NewsHour story. Ali Rogan talked about a young woman named Lorelei Colbert. Now, in order to distract herself from her chemotherapy, Lorelei decided to create a chemo to kindness challenge. And on social media, she encouraged people to do random acts of kindness. The challenge generated 1,127 acts of kindness during her chemotherapy. And she credited it for helping her get through that very difficult part of her life, so much so that she continued it afterwards. Just being kind to people has biochemical effects. Naomi Eisenberg, who's a UCLA professor, claimed that 2 or 3 acts of kindness per week significantly reduces depression and anxiety. So why don't we perform more acts of kindness? Eisenberg says that she thinks it's because we underestimate the impact of good deeds on others and on ourselves. We tend to discount it. In fact, one study said that just remembering being kind to people can make you get out of a rut. So, that's not an excuse to go home and just think about being kind, but it's intriguing. All right, now, all of the talk I've given so far comes out of a paradigm dominated by individualistic assumptions that Kohlberg had and is dominant in Western thought. And I've thought about this a lot because I think that we always assume in our culture that we're all autonomous actors trying to maximize our particular interests. And sometimes our interests may overlap with people, and that's when we'll be good to each other, when those interests overlap. So it got me thinking in graduate school, does that mean that if doing good is based out of our self-interest, does that corrupt the ethical value of doing good if it's only out of self-interest? Does it, in fact, the self-interest, whether that's evolutionary advantage or being treated well, being included, or that hit of oxytocin, does that negate the moral quality of our actions? Are ethical actions those that are selfless, that require some sacrifice of time and energy? Now, those questions are very important to consider when we look at do-gooders who seem that they're merely using opportunities to win ethical points. The people that walk down the street and give $1 to somebody who is asking for change only when somebody's watching them do it. Now, this can be grandiose. There's something called the hero syndrome. There was a case a number of years ago around I think it was the Los Angeles Olympics in 1984. There was a police officer named Jimmy Wade Pearson who planted a fake bomb on the bus of Turkish athletes so that he could discover the bomb and save the day, right? Now, that happens all the time in less dramatic forms where philanthropists seem to spend more time at photo ops about their generosity than with the people being helped by their generosity. And this shallow behavior puts into question just how much ethical praise they deserve. It seems less admirable to help others merely to get recognition or monetary rewards or oxytocin. It might make you feel happier if you do that, but I think it loses its ethical luster. But what about when helping others is its own reward? What is that? Having no other benefit. Does that reward allow the good to remain pure and noble? Now, there's a lot less of a concern for that question in classic cultures. For example, I don't read a lot of Greek philosophers worried about the purity of our motives as much as we do these days. And I think it's partially because we're a culture that has a lot of Freud's influence on us. When we became convinced 100 years ago that everything we do is based on self-interest. Now, it may be true, but for the Greeks, concern for the self and concern for others are both part of the good life. That was one of their most common assumptions. It's wrapped up as identifying as a citizen. Community interests and my own interests in that paradigm intertwine. It's the mutual enhancing life of an engaged civic person that allows everybody to flourish. And isn't that something noble that we all want? What's wrong with wanting a rewarding life, along with other people having rewarding lives? It reminds me of a phrase of the famous 19th century agnostic activist Robert Ingersoll. It's one of his greatest phrases. Happiness is the only good. The time to be good is now. The place to be good is here. The way to be happy is to make others so. Again, down to earth, seems common sense and very appealing. It wraps commitment to others up with a rewarding life. The two are intertwined. Now, this is very much connected to the rise of humanistic psychology and what is known as the positive psychology movement. Many of you know it. It actually began here in Philadelphia. These influences convinced people that human nature is really better than the way we used to think about human nature generally. I think most of you maybe in this community agreed with this overall, and it's part of the Unitarian and a lot of positive liberal religions have believed this for years. But I think generally we no longer see ourselves as depraved creatures living a life that's just nasty, brutish, and short. I think we don't see sin as a part of our worldview. Maybe some of us do here, but I think most of us don't put a lot of emphasis on that. I don't think we encourage the idea of penance or fasting to the point of hurting our health or self-flagellation to prove our goodness. While helping others may require some sacrifice of time and energy, it doesn't require martyrdom. And this has been due in part because of humanistic psychology. Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers don't speak as much about the dark side of human nature as much about wellness and the desire to flourish. Rogers said, "The good life is a process, not a state of being." He saw goodness in lives of people that believed in free will, that they could do things that would help people. He wrote, "Humanistic psychology does not view the human ego as a pawn in a psychic battle between bodily needs and psychological archetypes." That would be the Freudian world. Human behavior is not solely determined by hunger, thirst, or instinctual drives. It's not determined merely as a reaction to external stimulus. Instead, human beings, while greatly affected by variables outside their control, can choose to discover and develop their potential. And this makes us happy. So there's an assumption of free will and an assumption of happiness that are wrapped up in human nature. Positive psychology, a more modern example of humanistic psychology, focuses a great deal on the importance of social ties, our friends and our families and our associates, that helps us make us happy. So rather than only focusing on problems within us, we look at opportunities outside of us. We turn outward from ourselves and find joy and connection and optimism. Positive psychology also embraces practicing kindness. We all want to be seen as a kind person, and that's okay. It's not a bad thing. A positive feedback loop continues. If we're kind, we get expressions of gratitude back to us, and we be kind again. So it creates this gratitude loop. Absence is the fear that somehow our good deeds are tainted by self-interest. It's simply a better life to live of mutual harmony and support with those people around me. It's almost, again, like common sense. In fact, there was a recent study saying that young children can feel better when they just are praised for being good. They feel better about themselves in all different ways. And I think most of you know that when you're with kids. You see that blossom. Feeling good about yourself was very important to a Dr. Katya Miles. She recommends that we practice treating ourselves with kindness. In fact, it's not just that we treat others kind, we treat ourselves kind. That's a part of humanistic philosophy. We do this by giving ourselves time to notice how we're feeling, to accept how we're feeling, to set boundaries about how far we can go. And this is considered a good thing. It's self-care. Practicing self-care helps you care for others. These are not opposed drives. Even the basics, diet, sleep, exercise, social interaction, those are good things for you, and they're good things for those who know you, because they want to see you flourish as well. About a decade ago, I heard a platform address at the Ethical Society of St. Louis by Professor Timothy Bono. He was the assistant dean at Washington University, and he was in the psychology department there. And he spoke about how through the history of psychology, especially the darker psychology of sort of 150, 100 years ago, he spoke about how we focused on what was wrong with people, on pathologies, on disorders of the mind. That sucked a lot of energy in the psychological establishment. But recently we've been broadening this and talking about the positive side of human nature, the most effective ways to pursue a good life. And Bono said, this is in our control, because it's in our control to be kind to others. And that, again, helps us be kind to ourselves. So he says, focus on the positive. We shouldn't aim for some sublime state. One element of positive psychology is not saying that there's some destination we have to get to in order to be healthy or be good. They're not a series of targets we have to hit and then we're done with it. In fact, living a good life is a process that continues for as long as we're alive. There's no end state. There's no perfection. Most intriguing, Bono talked about his insistence that our goal is not to be happy. Again, that's some sort of state that we get to. He said the goal should to be happier. I like that. Because that's something you can do every day, small step at a time. A smile to a stranger on the street as the beginning of a little bit feeling happy. It works for us when we act kind towards others, and it seems admirable, ethical, and achievable, whereas somehow becoming pure in the light of God seems unachievable. But I want to conclude by returning to what to me seems the core of the rewards of feeling good, the rewards of being good. Our moral judgment about our own actions often have to do with the type of reward we're seeking. So I'm going to leave us with this comparison. I'm going to suggest that we have two types of needs that tend to be things that we're going after. And the rewards are opportunistic rewards, opportunistic ones, which are exclusively self-serving. Like, where am I going to go get my hit today? Everybody else then becomes a tool to our achieving this. It's merely using other people to be happy for ourselves. People who seek those opportunities do so primarily because they want to be seen as ethically praiseworthy or get that oxytocin. They care very little about the actual welfare of the person they're helping. And in fact, opportunistic rewards can create an even greater distance between the person giving the help and the person being helped. And I think that's the important thing to keep in mind is what is the relationship between the helper and the helped? It's so easy when you want to emphasize that relationship that the person being helped ends up being an object of pity, right? Or a tool to prove the magnanimity and superiority of the person over the beneficiary of their actions. Somehow I am better than the person I'm helping. That is a big concern for a lot of activists today. Lila Watson is an Aboriginal activist in Australia who my children have quoted numerous times, who, when people came to her and said, we want to help with the Aboriginal cause, she replies to them, if you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come here because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let's work together. Unlike instrumental rewards, a mutual rewards, where our liberation is bound up together, is where we want to work together to better all humanity. The connection between the helper and the helped is so mutual that the distinction between them goes away. This is a healthier and more sustainable goal than doing good based on some hierarchy. I think it's much more ethical than noblesse oblige, which the recipient is the supported by some sort of assumption of their inferiority. It can create dependency between the giver and the gived. And it's certainly healthier, I think, than the models focused on martyrdom, embraced by some religious ascetics, where the giver has to become a martyr in order to maintain the ethical purity of their actions. Even the idea of ethical purity seems silly. Of course, motives are mixed, and that's okay. So to conclude, I'm going to emphasize that mutual reward implies an interpersonal equality. How much can you carry that into your helping others in your life? Between the giver and the receiver, an equality is at the center. This mutual reward, genuine compassion and respect are infused in the helping process. I mean, it makes me just think of the Giving Church that Eric is involved with. People who go out and help others on the street. It's done out of the sense of mutuality, not of the sense of superiority. I'll end with this quote by Buddhist monk Pema Chodron. She said that compassion is not a relationship between the healer and the wounded. It's a relationship between equals. Only when we know our own darkness well can we be present with the darkness of others. Compassion becomes real when we recognize our shared humanity. Good feels good, particularly when we feel good together. Thank you very much.